Kia ora everyone. I hope everyone's had an okay day wherever you are in New Zealand. I thought that I would jump online very quickly and just give another summary, perhaps a shorter one than the one that we did at 1 o'clock today, announcing what the rest of the alert level framework looks like. Oh, look, it's Leroy. No, don't leave. Let me introduce you to my senior private secretary who's in my work bubble. This is Leroy.
Hi, everybody.
I didn't tell him that I was doing a Facebook Live, so that was a little awkward for everyone involved.
Sorry.
That Leroy's rummaging around my in trays. Today we gave a bit more detail around the alert levels that obviously we've been working to since the very beginning of our framework that we put out some weeks ago, but of course we kept them relatively broad at that time. So you'll remember this graphic. So this is the one that had all of the alert levels attached to it, and it was on one page and gave a general guide of what the different alert levels look like. Since then we've been working obviously to move towards fleshing out those other alert levels beyond alert level 4, which everyone's really familiar with now. The key thing I think to share around the other alert levels is that at each stage, they all frame up how much contact we can afford to have with other people. So when we're at level 4, that's when really we've got a lack of control of COVID, community transmission, and we're trying to get control back. So that's the level where we eliminate our contact with one another, and that's what a lockdown looks like. At alert level 3, that's where you'll still really need to make sure that we've genuinely got control and that we genuinely have managing and working towards the elimination of the virus, and that's where we still need to restrict our contact with one another. So if you keep that in mind, then you'll see that there are still some pretty important rules we need to stick with at level 3. Think of it, though, still as that general principle of staying home. At alert level 3, which we've set out those details of today, you really do need to still stay at home. So that's one thing everyone needs to prepare for as we get ready for that future announcement somewhere down the track when we move to it, that we will still be asking people to stay at home. There are a couple of big differences though, so let me walk you through those. The first, let's talk about our bubbles. We're still asking people to keep their bubbles. And what we are saying though is that you can extend your bubble. There are a lot of people who have, for instance, a caregiver, maybe a de facto partner, maybe children in shared care that they haven't had contact with. So we are saying at level 3, if and when we move to that, people will be able to extend their bubble to include those people in their bubble. But again, keep it small, keep it exclusive. So that's how alert level 3 will apply to your bubble. Second question people are really interested in, how will it apply to work? We are still asking people to work from home if they can. So that's number 1. So if you've been able to work from home through alert level 4, when we move to alert level 3, we will still ask you to work from home. If you have a job where you can't work from home, then if you are able to undertake your work safely, you can return to workplaces. So what does safely mean? It means social distancing, it means good hygiene, and of course it means all of the other things that we've been putting in place around covering coughs, sneezes, and so on. Now, your workplace will need to go through a bit of a checklist themselves and provide a plan for employees around how they're going to manage a return to work safely. That's a really important point to make about the return to work. However, there are some exceptions. We are not at level 3. There will still be no restaurants open, no cafes, no bars, and no retail stores. But if they can provide deliveries, online shopping, click and collect, anything that removes that face-to-face contact with people, then they can start operating. But that's a really key thing. You cannot have that face-to-face interaction. And the reason for that is we still need to minimise that contact, and retail, hospitality still involves large numbers of people who will have contact with one another. So that's one of the That's one of the reasons for that. Jeanette, you've raised the point that hairdressers, you say, are more important than fast food outlets. This is not about creating a hierarchy of which professions are more important than others. It's simply around which professions can we undertake contactless trading with. So takeaways, you can produce takeaways for delivery or contactless pickup. But unfortunately, hairdressers, it can't be done without contact. And so that's really difficult, I know. So just wanted to acknowledge that it's something that's tough for that industry. Here's what's really important though. No one wants to be at these restrictive levels for too long. Our goal is to get to level 2, where actually, you'll remember we were there very briefly, is a lot more like normal than the others. So the goal is to be there for not long periods of time, but long enough to be confident that we're achieving our goal. A couple of other things about level 3 to share. One's on education. We're still asking children to be a part of distance learning at home. But for some families that won't be possible, particularly if parents are unable to work from home or they don't have caregivers at home. And so then in those cases we're asking for them to be a part of learning and then a schooling environment. But children and young people will need to be part of, basically they'll become a part of a bubble at school. So they won't have contact with just any children. They'll be kept in groups with a teacher, and that will become their school bubble. And that's how we manage the risk both for our teaching workforce but also for our children and their families. So it's all about keeping it contained so that if we need to in the future for any reason contact trace or anything like that, that's the way that we can do that. So think about it as having your school bubble added into the mix. I imagine though that's only up to and including year 10. No other age group within high school will be returning, and so the reason for that is because actually you can legally be at home by yourself as a young person. Beyond that age, you can be a part of your distance learning at home. So we've really tried to manage the numbers that will be within schools so that we can manage those bubbles and keep those numbers down, but making sure that all children have access if they need to and engage in distance learning, whether they're doing that in school or whether they're doing it at home. We'll keep working with our education sector and our schools to make sure that we do that in the way that works for everyone, for our teachers, for our children, and for our families. The other question, of course, has been about movement. Lots of questions about that at level 4. So for level 3, we used to ask you before to stay local. Now we're saying we actually want you to stay regional. The reason we're using that language is a lot of people will travel beyond just their neighbourhood to get to work or to get to school. And we're just asking, really, stick with that. If you live in Hamilton or if you live in Auckland, don't go to Hamilton. If you live in Hamilton, don't go to Auckland. Stick to your region, stick to the areas where you're having to go for work or for school. When it comes to recreation, lots of questions around that, and for really good reason. I know it's been tough. We've been asking people to do not very much, just walking around their neighbourhoods. At level 3, principles are really still important. And so the principles of level 3 in recreation are, we want you to stick to activities you can either do by yourself or with your bubble. That's the first thing. So similar to what we've asked at level 4. We want you to keep it safe. So not engaging in really risky activities. And we want you to do it, anything that's basically, make sure it's non-motorized. So don't go out on jet skis, don't go out on boats, things that actually can break down and cause issues. So that means at level 3, you will be able to go, for instance, for an ocean swim. Pools and recreational facilities still won't be open. You would be able to fish from the beach, for instance. But we don't want congregation. So this is something we're really going to keep an eye on. If we see congregation is happening, we will be reviewing all of those rules. So I'm just reading as I go. So sorry if that looks a little average while I'm multitasking. Some of your messages, unfortunately, are so long that I can't read the whole thing in one go. Lots of questions about early childhood education centres, and I see people asking about the fact that some of them are larger. And so really what we're hoping is with the time that's available, that early childhood education centres will, for instance, be able to reach out to their parent group and say, look, at Alert Level 3, will you be returning back to our centre? And then give a bit of time and a bit of planning for those centres to determine how they'll then organise themselves. The main issue for ECEs, and oftentimes, will be actually managing pickups and drop-offs, so you don't have congestion of lots of parents coming in at the same time. So we're hoping with this extra time that they may be able to help work through some of those issues and then decide how you might like to organise yourselves. We do accept, though, with ECEs, it is pretty hard to keep children in small contained groups. One of the things we've seen with COVID is that it hasn't had as much of an impact on younger children as it had for other groups. That doesn't mean, though, that we aren't very mindful of looking after those children, keeping them in close bubbles if we can, and looking after the teachers that work with them. So there is guidance coming out of the Ministry of Education on how to manage all of those issues, because we've really been trying to think all of them through as well. So that's a broad overview. Upshot is, though, no announcement on when we're moving yet, but lots of preparation for when we do. You may have questions, and I may not have answered them, especially if you've written something that's particularly long that I can't see in one go. But I will keep giving lots of advice. Jump on the COVID-19 website. You'll see even more. So this is just one page of the many pages of detail on the alert levels, and so it's all there. It'll hopefully answer some of the questions that you have. If it doesn't, then we've got some time to work through some of those extra questions, and you can reach out to MB if you're a business in particular. One final thing is, of course, always, though, remember that the one principle we're still asking everyone to apply, though, at both those alert levels is stay at home as much as you can. Finally, the announcement, though, about when we'll move doesn't come till next week. So in the meantime, we're all still in level 4 lockdown, everyone, so don't change your behaviour yet. Everyone's doing so well. 15 cases today, and of those, even in the last week, the number that we're still trying to attribute, very, very small. So that tells us we know what's going on still with COVID, and we can write down to individual cases, which is exactly what we need. So stay in touch, everyone. Do look after yourselves. Do take some time out for yourselves. Be kind to yourselves, and I'll be back in touch very, very soon. Take care.